I'm here today to invite you to explore why and how we can be putting this social back into social media. And let me just warn you, because I'm infamous for talking really fast. I will also be slide bumping you. I will be doing so without regret, because it's my style. And I will try to explain to you the insights I've gained by analyzing 130 million posts and comments from social media. So we have to do that in 18 minutes roughly, so let's get started. In 2019, where I'll begin my story, I was on a very dark path, so I'll just step out of the lights. The research cooperative where I'm working, we were exploring threats to digital democracy, including disinformation, echo chambers, and verbal attacks and hate speech. Now, before I drag you into this darkness with me, I'll just give you a bit of context. This is the Kingdom of Denmark, where I'm from. We're roughly 6 million people. We're one of the most digitalized societies in the world, which also means that 91% of us use social media. 82% of us use Facebook, and Facebook is the most prevalent social media in Denmark. And I'm only saying this because the empirical data that I'll be presenting today will be centered around Denmark and around Facebook. However, this doesn't mean that the mechanisms I'll be describing, both good and bad, doesn't apply to other platforms or other countries, as many scholars have proven, all right? But this is just my context. So, back into the darkness, I was working on the first national mapping of verbal attacks and hate speech in the digital public debate. And for that, we had developed an AI that could detect verbal attacks. And with this AI, we had analyzed all the posts and comments of Danish media pages and politicians and parties' pages on Facebook. So that was roughly 63 million posts and comments. We wanted to know, how bad is it? How bad is the online debate, right? Not good, I can tell you. So the results were really, really bad. First of all, we found that 1 in 20 of all comments published on these pages contained a verbal attack, that is offensive language or hate speech. But what was even more downheartening was that it wasn't evenly distributed between us. And I think this is important. We all don't get our fair share of the shit online. There are some favorite victims. You see them listed up here. So it's not evenly divided between us. Another very depressing fact that we unearthed, which is also confirmed by the famous whistleblower Frances Haugen, is that the best strategy if you want to grow on Facebook, grow your reach and grow your engagement, is through verbal attacks and hate speech. Darn. So another really important thing that we unearthed is that in Denmark, we see a dynamic where 65% of the population don't want to participate in debates online because of the debate culture, right? And our analysis showed that it was 1.5% of the users were behind 100% of the attacks. So we call this the imbalanced freedom of speech, right? So there was an imbalance between the freedom of speech of the 1.5% and the safety of speech of the 65% that didn't want to participate. At this point in time, we were ready to just recommend a boycott. Democracy is an offline practice. We can't manage it. Let's just sign out, right? The thing is, I was also doing a lot of field work within digital communities, and I saw something there that just didn't tally with what I found. You know, the 65% that didn't want to participate. Because when I looked into digital communities such as Angling for People with Disabilities and Their Helpers, where 800 people were helping one another find the perfect spot for fishing when you were in a wheelchair. I found communities such as a safe space for mental vulnerability, which was just that, actually a safe space for mental vulnerability between strangers. There were Looking for a Friend, Never Alone group. There were Support Our Public Employees, like a social mobilization from bottom up, where people were in political protest groups and having a lively debate. And we had a network of bonus grandparents, where families with young children could be matched with elderly people who wanted to lend a hand or a hug. So this was proving me wrong, right? Proving my other data wrong. So we began looking for nuances. And you always need to look for the nuances, right? And the nuances told us that there were actually different levels of verbal attacks online. So when we looked at the pages of politicians, 6% of all the comments contained verbal attacks. The media pages had 4% verbal attacks in their commentaries. But the citizen-led groups only had 1% attacks in their debate. And then the perfect thing was when we looked at the engagement, it was completely the other way around, right? So the politicians of Denmark only have 3% of the engagement online, and the media has 7%. And what do you know? The citizens' own digital communities have 90% of the engagement. So it turns out all is not rotten in the digital state of Denmark. And this is where I became annoying. I rose out of the darkness as a missionary. And like I write up here, I really became insufferable at parties. I'm like, have you heard the good news? So whenever I go outside and people will be talking to me, I'll be like, oh, you're into wood turnery. I have the perfect group for you. Oh, your kid was diagnosed with ADD. I have a digital lifeline for you. You can thank me later. Because it turned out that a digital renaissance had happened right underneath our noses within this format. So in Denmark alone, we have 48,000 active groups with more than 100 members. 70% of all Danes are a member of a Facebook group, and in the groups are published 450,000 posts and comments every day. Remember, we're 6 million people, right? So that's more than 70,000 letters to the editor each day in content. That's a lot of public debate, right? And globally, the numbers are completely silly. These are not my numbers, but according to Meta, we have tens of millions of active groups. 1.8 billion users a month are active in those groups. And an online survey shows that 76% of us are a member of online communities in general. So there's something about this community format that challenges the notion that digital democracy should be an offline practice, or that democracy should be an offline practice at least. So they're called things such as relatives of people fighting eating disorders, debate group for international families, all of us with dogs and humor, girl talk for the 13+ people. So we call it the digital civil society. And now, you know, when you're faced with a missionary like me, you have to ask critical questions. So now I will try to meet you, because you should have a critical question for me by now. Mikkeline, are there no bad groups? And yes, there are. There are bad groups. We categorized 48,000 of them, and 1% of them are what we call antisocial. But that's a very low percentage, right? Can you get bad advice in one of these groups? Certainly, definitely. But at least it's made on a public community board, and they very rarely go uncontradicted, because everyone else can see them, right? So we love being right, so we will contradict one another in those communities. And to be honest, you can also get a really bad advice from your mom's friend, Jan, who wouldn't believe that your kid had ADD, because when he was young, people didn't have ADD at all, so it's probably just a figment of your imagination, right? Bad advice is everywhere. So, now I'm going to spread to you my gospel. And that is, we have actually identified 6 reasons why this digital civil society is the best of social media. And that's because we wanted to find out, why does this work? Reason number 1, which is very important, is that these communities are membership-based as opposed to follower-based. So I can follow the page of the Danish Prime Minister, a Facebook page, an Instagram account, a YouTube channel, and I can comment below her posts or videos or wherever, but I have no way of raising a common agenda with her on a common bulletin board. But in the groups, they're membership-based, so everyone have equal access to the floor, equal access to setting the agenda once you become a member, right? So the structure makes an enormous difference. The other thing is that they're almost always built on common ground. And that common ground could be our town, our diagnosis, our profession, our sexuality, our ethnicity, our existential crisis, our hobby. So we have something in common when we enter these communities. And a related point is that these communities contain all sorts of activity. So in the communities you can find boasting, advice, protesting, organizing, counseling, mourning, education, debate, support, donations, aid, mobilization, joking, recommendations, warnings, and news. So it's not only debate we see in these groups, we see all sorts of activity. And that is why I say they figured it out. They figured out how we put the social back into social media, because they're pouring social glue into the communities every day, which makes it much easier to have sensitive discussions, really. Social glue. That doesn't mean that they're not arguing in the groups. We used to play a game, me and my colleagues. I would say, name me a group and I'll tell you what they're fighting about. You might know this if you're a member of a digital community, right? You can fight everywhere. So back to the case of for people with dogs and humor. In this group, they'll be discussing whether tail ducking in dogs, cutting the tails of dogs, is to be considered more or less animal cruelty than ducking the tails of pigs. Is it? And should we be obliged to try to feed our dogs environmentally friendly pet food? Is that an obligation we have in these times? They'll be discussing stuff like that, right? In the mom club, they will be debating whether or not boys can wear dresses to kindergarten, and how do you divide the emotional and practical labor at home. And they'll be raising awareness about the rights of people giving birth at the hospitals and the care and the staffing in the kindergartens, right? So politics seeps in everywhere. The other very important point about this is that these groups are established and led by citizens. So we have 100,000 administrators and moderators administrating the 48,000 Danish digital communities. They put in hours that will accumulate to 11,000 full-time positions each year. So that's more employees than eBay has, or Spotify. So a lot of hours are being put into making these communities good, right? And it's day and night, and this is a new kind of voluntary work, because the digital never sleeps. Another important point about led by citizens is that we also have a human bouncer. Also very important. So Lisa, who runs your local group, she won't put up with your shit, to say it directly. If you violate group rules, you'll be kicked out. She'll be screening your profile for bot behavior. She will not admit you if you're like too anonymous or won't be in contact with her. She'll write to you to test if you're a real person, right? And if you think that Lisa is a mean dictator, and she could be, you never know, then you're very lucky, because another thing that we found in this society, the digital civil society, is what we call democratic abundance. And I'm going to explain this to you through a case. So this is the case of f.m.b.a. f.m.b.a is a city in Denmark, roughly 70,000 inhabitants. And in f.m.b.a, there are at least 5 local groups. So we have Facebook f.m.b.a. We have information from citizen to citizen in the town of f.m.b.a. We have information from citizen to citizen in f.m.b.a. And we have f.m.b.a, almost everything is allowed. And then we have f.m.b.a, everything is allowed. And the funny thing is, even in f.m.b.a, everything is allowed. There are, guess what, 13 rules. Because the administrator will come to realize how hard it is to balance freedom of speech with safety of speech. And the administrators will find out that they have to set boundaries towards the 1.5% that are behind all of the attacks, otherwise the 65% don't want to participate, right? So, you can try your strength as a digital leader if you think your local administrator is a tyrant, and I think you should, all of you. In these groups, we also find more diversity than echoes, because heartbreaks looks the same at all levels of society. And both homeless people and nuclear families love their furry family members, right? And debate group for Danish international families, that group will have international families that are very well resourced, but also some of the most vulnerable families. So you'll actually meet people that you've never met before. And in that sense, we say that the digital civil society, they deliver the original promise of the internet. So inclusion of groups, right, that are at the margins of society, pooling of minds and knowledge, finding like-minded people that will understand your problems, and find a community of belonging if you stand out, whether it's because you're the only queer in a rural area, or it's because you're a senior citizen with a bit too much sass for your local community, right? So, I began by telling you that the digital public debate on the Facebook pages of media and politicians was collapsing. And I think it is. But now you've also heard my gospel, you've heard my good news, and that is, in the hands of the people, digital communities and public debate is overall thriving. So democracy is an online practice and should be, but, and I need to drag you into the darkness again before I finish, all of this exists in sheer defiance on platforms that are still largely optimized for retention and consumption. So it's still true that to this day, polarization and hate is enhanced by these platforms. All right? So I want you to consider, moving forward, the potential. Imagine the potential if we build digital social infrastructure around common grounds, around these dynamics that I described. If we made community the starting point for how we design all infrastructure. If we did that, and I think we should, we would be taking the lead from those who are actually already pouring hours and social glue into this system, all the volunteers, all of the members. And since I am an empirical girl from an empirical world studying data, I will just finish off by showing you this Danish digital civil society. 48,000 Facebook groups that are linked with their common ground. Each dot represents a group. So this is the digital civil society of Denmark. And I think we have to take our lead from that if we really want to be putting the social back into social media. Thank you.